I work at a seasonal haunted house that my small town has. I do have another job, but this is one of the ones that I usually do for fun. It pays good money, the co-workers are great, and even one of my bosses is my best friend, so there's not really much to complain about. It's easy money. The whole 5 years that we've been doing this little haunted house thing, it's become really popular. We typically get around 500 customers a weekend. So my boss says that we need to work more. So instead of closing at around 10, our last run usually closes at around 12. It's worked great because we get a lot more revenue that way. Anyway, one night I got put on the really late shift because a coworker of mine had fallen seriously ill. The whole weekend I was on the late shift, so I was already pretty used to it. The time was around 11:30 and the last renter had just gone in. My coworker's friend started taking his stuff out of his locker, and so I thought to do the same. We knew we was able to leave in around 45 minutes, 15 minutes to close, so we was pretty excited. Me and my coworker's friend usually work security because we're pretty buff guys, so we just take it in turns going to get our stuff from our lockers because my boss gets super nervous about people breaking in because it's a pretty high-end area. So he gets his stuff out of his locker while I'm all alone, and as soon as he leaves, I hear rustling in the corn maze we have. I can track the customers, so I know none of them are in the corn maze. And I also know there's no workers in the corn maze because it's so dark that we don't need anybody there. It's scary anyways, I guess. So I'm thinking to myself that it's probably just my manager checking the premises, making sure everything is good for closing, or one of my friends or co-workers. But I was completely wrong. One of the most scariest points in my life happened in an instant. I'm sitting there staring at the cornfield, and I hear a chainsaw. I go crazy because we've never had a chainsaw at our haunted house, and probably won't after this. I took my walkie-talkie out and radio my boss that I hear the chainsaw. He is in his office, so he says that I'm joking and I'm probably just tired. I keep my eye on the cornfield until my coworker gets back. I'm freaking out at this point, telling him everything that happened. He says that he'll be fine and to go get my stuff. I run really quickly and go get my stuff out of the locker, but it takes me a while because I have to change clothes from all of my security clothes to my normal ones. And to my surprise, when I get back, my coworker isn't to be seen. I'm so confused because he's not supposed to be leaving for another 35 minutes at this point. I radio on the walkie-talkie for him, and there's no answer. Me, my manager, my coworker's friend, and this guy are all on the same line, so we can all hear. I also asked them on the walkie-talkie if they had seen him, and all of them say no. All of a sudden, I hear the chainsaw again, but it's further away now. It's near the big field that we have. I go near the field, just to check, cause I'm freaking out at this point, and I see a tall man with a chainsaw cutting down the tree. It was the weirdest experience of my life. I go up to the guy, and I'm screaming at him to turn it off, and asking him why he's on our property, and he turns to me, looks me dead in the eyes, and says the creepiest thing I've ever heard in my life. He tells me I'm not alone. He then runs into the woods that we have next in our field. That was back in November, and I'm quitting the job in around 2 weeks because I've got a better one for this year. It was still one of the creepiest experiences of all time for me. I don't do nights anymore, but for years I used to work nights in a residential care facility. One of the spookiest was in a soul-charged dementia facility. 15 D3 residents, and no one but me to keep an eye on every single one of them. Around 3 in the morning, after doing an intentional round where you check all the residents are safe and sound, I hear the doorbell ring. I get a sudden wave of goosebumps because this is a secure facility, and it's also in the middle of the night. I go and look out the window, but there's nobody there. I blow it off as being a hallucination. 10 minutes later, it rings again, and I'm starting to scare myself. I go back to the window and check again. However, nobody's there, but I look across the street and a strange car is parked there. I take a photo of it just in case, and then I go back to my station where I've been playing a game of Match the Card Suits with a delightful but very demented lady. I sit down and she looks at me and says, "What did the gentleman want, dearie? He looked like he had a bad night and needs a cuppa." Chills go down my spine, but I brush it off because hallucinations are common with dementia, and this lady is particularly prone to not being oriented to time and place. The doorbell rings again, less than 5 minutes later, and this time I am really freaking out. Another one of my residents is up and walking the hallway, painting, with a clean paintbrush to keep him occupied. I pass him on the way to the front window, and he turns to me and says, "Don't answer the door alone. He might hurt you," before carrying on painting. I'm really scared at this point, and I'm trying not to cry. I don't know what to do. I'm a single 23-year-old female in charge of 15 people with varying stages of dementia, and the doorbell keeps ringing in the middle of the night, and it's a weekend, so my on-call won't answer the phone. She never does on the weekends. I look out the window and see the same car as before, and as I'm looking around, I see a shadow move in front of the door, and a person walks around the corner, and then looks straight in the window next to me. We make eye contact, and I scream. My residents start freaking out, I'm freaking out, and the guy just runs. I call the police, and after some time they show up. It's chaos, because I have 15 residents who have all been woken by the commotion, and now there is 2 police officers in their space. My on-call isn't answering her phone, and I'm struggling to deal with the whole situation. Eventually, after many cups of tea and Milo, and 2 lots of PRN meds for the more challenging residents, we're mostly settled. It's 7 AM now, and the handover shift arrives of a nurse and a caregiver. I tell them what happens, and they tell me that there was a woman down the road whose house was just broken into, and she was attacked in her bed by a drug seeker who ransacked her house looking for drugs. I have an internal meltdown because we have drugs in the cupboard in the med room. Good drugs too. Morphine, methadone, fentanyl, etc. I can't help but wonder if he was intentionally looking for us and just took the next best option. For reference, the facility was an old converted boarding house in a gentrified area, so lots of old doctors' houses in the area. Easy to mistake the home I worked at for a regular house. I left that job not long after because they refused to hire a second person to work the nights, despite it being understaffed according to the best practice guidelines. I worked the closing shift alone at a gas station during college. It was probably not the best place to have a teenage girl all alone at night looking back on it, especially since we were the first gas station off the interstate exit. One night, my little sister stopped in to visit. She was probably 17 at the time. As we stood there talking, we noticed 4 ragged, dirty-looking men get out of this really beat-up car and start miling around the parking lot. One of the men walked in and looked at me and my sister quickly, before looking away and acting very interested in the lottery machine that was beside the door. He stood at the machine for a few seconds before fidgeting around and then walking out. He stood right beside the newspaper dispenser, just outside the door, and you could periodically see him gesturing to the other three men, who had now gotten back in the vehicle and kept driving it around in the parking lot. We obviously noticed this strange behavior, and we was pretty nervous. She ended up staying with me for over an hour, until we thought they had left and had been gone for a while. I walked to the door with her as she walked out, and I watched her get into her car. As soon as she put her car in reverse, I saw headlights come on from a dark corner of the parking lot that you couldn't see from inside the store. It turns out the men had never left in the first place. They had pulled out and immediately swung into a little gravel turn-in beside the store and pulled right back in, completely unseen, and backed into an out-of-way parking spot and turned out all of their lights. As my sister's car pulled up to the highway to turn out of the parking lot, they had pulled up right behind her and turned onto the road when she did. I was scared, and so I decided to call the police and have them wait at my sister's apartment for when she arrived. For context, this was before cell phones were common, around 2004, so I wasn't able to call her and warn her personally. Fortunately, nothing happened to her, but when I talked to her again, she told me that she had noticed somebody behind her the whole drive home, but again, there was no cell phone. It makes me sick to think about what could have happened had I not walked to the door with her that night and noticed the car hiding in the shadows. I used to work the night shift at a convenience store in the bad end of a small town. Notes to consider before we begin. I usually keep my hair short as it's easier to maintain with my OCD, and I have large shoulders and a general football player build for a woman. My co-worker, however, was little, with long blonde hair and a pretty face. Super nice, too. So, most of the folks who came in here were fine, or weird but harmless. There was occasional idiots and inconsiderates, the drunks and the tweakers, not to mention the Karens and the Chads. But hey, what can you do? It was the guy in the camper who was the problem. Whenever I worked with my co-worker, we'll call her L, we busted a gut laughing it up as best as we could in a grease trap of a store that only has 4 radio stations. Camper guy comes in one night, and he starts talking with L. I'm stocking the cigarettes right behind the register, and she's approximately 5 feet away at the deli counter. He seems harmless enough, at first anyway, but I'm suspicious of everyone, so I'm keeping an eye on things. Dude has the usual small talk, weather, how busy we were, but then he starts asking about Elle and her infant daughter. He starts taking slow steps towards the open end of the deli counter. Elle is trying to be nice and back away toward the cooler entrance. Her body was turned to go. By the time I notice and step down from the register, he's close enough that she's pressed up against the hand-washing sink. All 6 feet of me is now stuck to the side of my little co-worker, and the guy takes a step back. He gets some diesel for his camper and leaves. However, it doesn't stop there. He comes in whenever we two specifically are working. We notice the pattern immediately. We try to get him to leave by being curt and dismissive, but he asks Elle more and more personal questions. Who's her new boyfriend? Where does she have tattoos? How close does she live? I send her to the cooler to check for, I don't know, ice cream or something. He'd buy his diesel and then go sit in his camper near the diesel pumps, where there were no streetlights. A few nights he hadn't left before we closed up, so I followed Elle in my car as she walked home, made sure she was okay. She didn't like taking favors when she was capable of doing something herself, but believe me, I insisted. Before I go on, yes, so we told our manager multiple times, but the only thing he replied with was, "There's nothing we can do if he hasn't said or done anything." Okay, cool, whatever. It escalated to him confronting her on her smoke break, and cornering her in the back of the building by the dumpster. And if our maintenance guy hadn't been there that night, I might have been filing a police report and wiping my knuckles clean if I'd been there first. Luckily, we got him on our security camera, but what can you do when he doesn't come back to the station after that? Manager didn't want problems. Cool. I left the job a few months after that. Last I heard, Elle is at a new job, engaged to her boyfriend, which is great for her. She's super sweet, but will I ever work at a gas station ever again? Probably not.